You're listening to Accounted For, the Canadian podcast that explores the intangibles of every career. I'm your host, Daniel Lee. Hey everyone, happy Wednesday. I've been sick for the past week, so my voice is not as great, so apologies there. It's this weird Toronto winter that's spanning all the way into March, unfortunately. This podcast is brought to you by OMD Ventures, my platform focused on human capital investing. So go on the website, check out weekly articles on redefining the status quo in work and life, as well as my daily learnings on becoming healthy, wealthy, and wise. Check it all out at oldmandan.com, and remember to subscribe to show your support and be part of the community. Also, please help the podcast and friends you love by telling one friend this week about Accounted For. Make a difference in your friend's life. Also, something I am doing that I recently created is that it would really help me improve the podcast and the overall OMD Ventures platform is to learn who you, my listeners, are. I made a survey that I would really appreciate if you filled out. It should take no more than 5 minutes of your time, and you can remain anonymous as well. Please make the time to head on over to www.oldmandan.com/podcasts. So podcasts with an S. And yeah, fill out the survey. It would really help me in really understanding who my listeners are and what you folks might want more of, and I can constantly try to build out and iterate on the product as still a solopreneur. And so without further ado, today's podcast guest is Raphael Wong, the Director of Strategic Initiatives at Thoughtwire. On top of his role at Thoughtwire, Raph is the founder of myTechne.io. That's spelled mytechne.io. It's a company with a mission to create the tools to help you succeed in what matters most in your life. He is also the host of a monthly podcast called the Canvas series, where he explores creating systems for success with his guests. I met Raph through our past podcast guest, Luki, from episode 23, who thought Raph and I would have a really fun conversation, and we did just that on the podcast. We just jived so much on human optimization and just thinking about creating systems to make ourselves more effective. So there's a bit of a nerd out in terms of that element. But in this episode, we bounce around on how Raph was able to build the role he wanted at Thoughtwire when he just first joined as a consultant to now becoming a director of strategic initiatives, kind of a position he created for himself. And also why he felt he left consulting too soon back when he was at PwC, and what led him to create myTechne, what it's like to just build out a system just completely focused on his own curiosity, and just much more. I had a lot of fun talking to Raph, and I really hope you guys will find value out of this conversation as well. So without further ado, here's my chat with Raph. Hey everyone, welcome back to Accounted For. Today on the podcast, we have Raphael Wong, the Director of Strategic Initiatives at Thoughtwire. Hey Raphael, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and for our guests who are not familiar with Thoughtwire, could you explain to them what the company is and what it really does?
Yeah, so Thoughtwire is a high-growth technology company based in Toronto. And, effectively what we do is we create applications for hospitals and buildings to improve general operations. And what I mean by that is how do we enable the people, the systems, and the devices inside these built environments to work in a more coordinated and orchestrated fashion to create real economic outcomes. So to give an example, in hospitals, we've created applications that allows doctors and nurses and other care providers to work with the different devices and health systems inside the hospital to say, to address a patient's needs before they deteriorate and enter into a code blue, which is a cardiac arrest, right? So we're effectively creating an application to get people to work together to save lives. In the context of buildings, it's really how can people inside the building, both the tenants and building operators, use technology and all the things around it to create a better experience, right? So you walk in, the lighting, the temperature, everything's adjusted to your particular needs and preferences. We also, give the building operator managers the ability to, address safety concerns like a lockdown, or to turn off energy, like lighting, to save energy, right? Like when you look around downtown Toronto, at night, you see all of these lights on in all these buildings, and you have to wonder, like, how much, who's actually in these buildings at this time? And I would bet odds are there's no one in there. So why are these lights still on? How much energy is it consuming? And that's both from an economic problem as well as from an environmental problem. So that's what really Thoughtwire does.
Okay, and so it, from what I'm understanding, it seems like the business model is kind of like similar to like a consultancy, where you have companies that come to you with a problem and you practically try to create a solution for them. It's not really more like a out of box solution. It's more customizable, it seems.
So I'd say over the last year, we've definitely shifted as a business model towards a product led application approach. So in the past, we had our core platform and we had certain templates and solutions, and we do a lot of services work to customize and configure to the customer's unique needs. As we continue to scale as an organization, and that's really been over the last, just over 12 months, we've created, very specific products. So we have 3 specific products right now in hospitals and 2 specific products in buildings. And, we can configure them to a certain degree, but, like, it is what it is. And, we're trying to have, more specific solutions so that it allows us to scale much faster.
Okay. And I'm just trying to wrap my head around, just trying to actually visualize how this kind of product would look like. But is it mainly just like you're creating software that you implement inside the existing systems of a client? Is that how it really works?
Yeah. So we create software, and it could be either mobile or desktop, and effectively this sits on top of those systems that we integrate with, right? So say if I'm a tenant, for example, and I walk into a building, I can use the Thoughtwire app and I can see, okay, so this is the temperature right now in the zone. This is the level of lighting, and then I can adjust it up or down depending on what those preferences are. And then from a building operator perspective, I can see all the usage data for all the different systems in one place. And while that sounds very obvious, right, especially as a consumer in consumer tech, we're used to seeing everything all in one place, and it kind of makes sense. But like in the enterprise world, to find out, what is your usage pattern in lighting, to find out that, if this particular light bulb or HVAC element is broken, where is it? Something as simple as that is often not readily available. You have to go back to the floor plans. You have to ask certain engineers. No one knows where anything is or how to access certain things. And especially in, where we're heading right now, a lot of the people who retains this knowledge about how to operate building systems, they're approaching retirement, right? And this new wave of, I would say, employees coming up, they didn't grow up with how to use a BAS system. They didn't grow up how to use an HVAC system. So our technology, simplifies that. We aggregate the information together. We put it into a very simplified user interface, and then we give people ability to send commands and controls into these systems without having to go into very specific, complex and siloed systems.
Got it. And it's funny because like we were introduced to each other by a mutual friend, Luki, who was a past podcast guest on Accounted For, and he was telling me about how, oh yeah, Raph's a very systematic guy. I think you'll like talking to him. And as you're talking about Thoughtwire, yeah, it seems like it's practically creating a lot of different systems. Have you always been a systematic guy? Like ever since like a child, like were you all about making things efficient, finding the fastest way to get to places?
Not necessarily. No, I'd say growing up, I kind of just had the a go with the flow kind of mentality. I think when I really developed a sense for systems, whether it's processes or use of tooling or, engaging different people and environment around me, I think that really began when I started to In university, it was really how do I juggle all these different things together, and then that naturally led me down a career in management consulting, which I think further pushed me to double down on being systematic, on being methodical, and being very intentional with a methodology and thought process, and how to create predictable outcomes. And then consulting helped me double down on that. And then since then, through my whole career journey, everything I've done has really been around how to be systematic so that I can organize information, get outputs, and yeah.
And we also talked about how earlier you, just before the recording itself, that you love adventure, and we were talking about my trip to Southeast Asia and East Asia, and how you're planning on going back to Vietnam and also hitting up Cambodia as well. Was adventure part of your life very early on? This sense of adventure, this sense of exploring?
I would say yes and no. So no, in a sense that I didn't grow up traveling. It wasn't something I always did. I didn't grow up with that sense of I want to go to different places. Or even within Toronto, it wasn't something that was innate in me. But I think in the sense of adventure, in that I've always been curious. I've always wanted to try different things. Growing up, I didn't just play one sport and go deep on it for 10 years. I think I played practically every sport. If you look at my Spotify list, I like all types of music. I've read all types of books. I watch all different types of TVs and movies and whatnot. And for me, variety, I think, has been for sure an innate characteristic. And that sense and desire for variety, for novelty, for trying new things, I think that was what drove me down consulting by definition, because of the nature of that industry. And everything I've done since has always been driven by that sense of trying new things, right? I don't think I've really hesitated on that. I think if anything, one area that I need to do better in is to go more deep and building depth. I've always had a lot of breadth in something that I've innately just genuinely enjoyed.
Yeah, and I think if we look at your career path from a high level, if someone looked at your LinkedIn profile, it would look at, okay, so you went to U of T, you did business there, and then you went to PwC to do consulting there for about 4 years, and then now you've been at Thoughtwire for close to around 4 years as well, right? Mm-hmm. And I think, so when I was in business school, I didn't know what consulting was until I got interviews for consulting, and then that's when I started looking up, okay, so this is what consulting is. And so that's kind of what happened serendipitously for me. But for you, as someone who's also, because I was also very curious, and so I was serendipitously hit with consulting and thinking, oh wow, I'm a really curious person, and this will allow me to kind of hit up all the curious factors that I have. But how was that during, for you when you were in university? Did you kind of hit upon it randomly, or did you kind of know about it ahead of time and you said that consulting thing, that's going to fit my personality, that's what I'm going to do?
Yeah. So to look backwards, let's go back to, I'd say, even grade 8. I remember in grade 8 yearbook.
Take me back, yes.
There was one question in a grade 8 yearbook that said something about what do you want to do when you grow up? And so I guess we're 12 or 13 years old at the time, and people said different things, they want to be an author, they want to be a hockey player. I said a businessman. I think since a very young age, there's something about these tall towers, the hustle and bustle, the scale of things, that always had an appeal to me, and I don't know why. And it may have been materialistically driven, right? I won't deny that. But there was something about the business world that always intrigued me. So I went to University of Toronto at Rotman Commerce and did the business program there. And then at first I was like, you know what? Let's do accounting. Right. So actually, I think what most people don't know is that I actually started thinking that I was going to be an accountant and a CA and a CFO at some point in my life, right? And
what? Sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt, but why accounting?
You know what? It was just one that seemed obvious. I think there was no particular reason. I think my aunt was in accounting, so that was I was like, you know what? Let's pick that horse and we'll run with it. And again, it was a sense of novelty that attracted me. There was no sense of why. At that point in my life, I wasn't really pulled by why. I wasn't very intentional. I was like, oh, you know what? There's something new. I'm going to chase it. So I did. And then in my first year, I was like, you know what? I want to get an internship at one of these big firms. So I actually did my first term at PwC in audit. And I was like, you know what? And I remember everyone saying no. Most people if they're lucky, they get their internship in their 30 or so on and so forth. I was like, no, like I'm going to do what I can right now to get that job. And I did. So I got my internship, PwC in audit, and I was like 19 years old or something like that. I was super young.
Is this like second year then? Or
Yeah. I just right at second year. And so I did that for a summer, and I was like, you know what, this is not for me. And I didn't know what was for me, but I knew that this was not for me. And I said, no, I can't do this. And I remember everyone going like, oh my gosh, like, you know, like you're so ungrateful. You had this amazing opportunity. You're so young. Why would you, you know, like, why would you not want this? Like, you know, suck it up. It's a good job. It's a good industry. And like all of that baggage, as you can imagine, both from family, friends, and just like the university community. And I was like, no, I just can't do it. It's just not for me. So I started to network. I built relationships in other aspects of the firm. And then I found my way to consulting. I was like, okay, this sounds kind of interesting. And just so we're clear, I had no idea what consulting was. And then, so then in school, I joined the Consulting Association to learn more about it. And then fast forward a couple of years, I started my career in consulting after university.
Got it. And you still did consulting at PwC though, so yeah. Were you constantly keeping contact with the PwC folks and trying to find a way to return back to PwC as a consultant? Was that the intention?
Yeah, that was always something that I thought about, just because I already had relationships there. And like, I liked the firm, I liked the variety, and I think at the time what they offered was a very generalist type program. You come in and you try different aspects of consulting, so different competencies, whether it's like strategy or operations or finance or technology or risk. And I was like, you know what? Again, it fed to my desire for variety. I'm like, this is perfect. I don't got to pick a horse. I can just go and try different things. And that's what I did in consulting. I think a lot of folks, you know, some folks at least, they opted for the path of like, you know, they just wanted to do financial services, or they just wanted to do retail or supply chain. So they picked one specific industry or one specific competency, and they stuck with that. I was like, no, you know, and I think walking in, you know, it's probably worth to set the context. I walked in with the intention that I want to learn as much about business as possible so that I can start my own company and run a company one day, back to that grade 8 ambition of being a quote unquote businessman without knowing what that actually meant at the time. So I did everything from strategy to operations, you know, supply chain, process improvement, technology, risk management, like the whole spectrum. I think I did like, you know, somewhere between like 7 to 10 different industries. So I played that whole matrix, and I didn't specialize in one area. I kind of just did a bunch of everything. And, you know, and we can talk about some of the pros and cons around that, but that was always been my focus. Like, that's been my strategy. I think some people don't necessarily agree with that. Again, back to the whole nature of a lot of people push for depth. I went for breadth, and I tried a lot of things. And I think, you know, now looking back in hindsight, it was the best decision I made, and it's definitely played well to A, my unique personality, and B, my holistic career strategy.
Yeah, and I think the big thing there that I would like the audience to kind of pay attention to is the intention behind why you're doing what you do. And that's something that I can definitely relate with, because, and I've talked about this before in my past podcasts as well, but I too had a very generalist kind of consulting resume, and that was the intention. I wanted, because like you, I was in audit. I stayed a little longer, and but obviously I faced the same backlash of people saying, "You're crazy. Why would you leave something like this?" But I specialized deep, so I knew what it meant to go really deep into something, because I only did investment banks as a client for like 3 busy seasons. And when going to consulting, I wanted to do the exact opposite, because it didn't meet my personality. That's when I knew, because I didn't have the earlier foresight at a younger age to understand that I'm a very curious person. I need more breadth and depth. But when I went to consulting, and so I'd love to hear your perspective as well on the pro and con. Like, I got a lot of pushback for trying to be a generalist. I've had senior leadership people at the consulting firm tell me to rewrite my goals, because they said your goals are wrong for our firm and you have to specialize. And I would tell back saying, no, I'm not going to rewrite my goals. That's your opinion. I don't really care. And so it caused a lot of strife between me and some people in leadership, and some people who actually cared about my growth said, no, if that's what you want to do, you should do it. So it became a very comfortable situation for 50% of the people, and very uncomfortable for 50% of the people. How was that journey like for you? Actually trying to navigate that and stay true to what you're trying to do, but at the same time fight that bureaucratic political nature.
Yeah, so I mean, to start, a lot of people gave that pushback. I'd say for me, it wasn't a 50-50 split. It was probably like a 95-5 split, right? And, some of my closest mentors, the people who gave me advice on, people who I looked up to, pointed me down this path. And, they would say, like, Raph, you're entering a point where, you want to converge and, be specialized in one area, do that for 10 years until you're 30 something. And then, and then from there you can diverge again. And just so we're very clear, I think that strategy makes sense. There's nothing wrong with that. And I would never encourage someone to pick either A or B. I think it depends on your why. It depends on your context, right? And you said something very interesting there. You said that the partner said that your goals don't align with the firm, right? If it is your ambition to, climb the corporate ladder, right, to become a partner, to become a VP or a C-level executive at a large company, I think that strategy of specializing and building depth makes absolute sense. There's no doubt about it. Like, I would say anyone who tells me that is their ambitions, I would say that's probably the framework and direction you want to start thinking about. But that wasn't for me. I figured out that I didn't want to do that. I wasn't attracted by doing the big banks as my client. I never wanted to be a partner at the firm. I never wanted to be a functional leader of any company. It was never an interest of mine. For me, I had an inkling that I was gonna do my own thing in my own little bubble, and so as a result of that, and I guess at the time, looking back right now, I guess that's that entrepreneurial pull. I didn't know what that was. I just knew, like, I think in strategy, people often think about strategy as having the right plan forward. I've also learned from a mentor that strategy is also knowing the things you don't want to do and not doing it, and having the courage to not do it. And for me, I knew that part of the world was not what I wanted to do, and I knew that for a fact. And I think too often we try to figure out the right answer instead of identifying the things that we know for sure are wrong and cutting that out. And removing the noise, and then that gives us more space and clarity to figure out what is right. So, and that builds and that lends to my sense of curiosity, right? And removing things I don't want and focusing on being curious and going down the path and exploring things I might like. So that's kind of how I approached it. I stayed true to my nature. I knew that that's not what I want to do. I wanted to try new things. I believe in having different skill sets. And as over the years now, as I refine that point of view, I started to think about, I am specializing. I am building depth. I'm just building depth in something that historically over the last 100 years, 150 years in the Industrial Revolution is not a label. I'm not specializing in an industry. I'm not specializing in a function. I'm specializing in a capability, specializing in the ability to quickly pick up new things, to learn new skills, and to create outcomes very quickly. And that kind of confidence, that kind of capability is something that I've built. I'm very confident in knowing that I can jump into something without having any previous experience about it, and quickly learning and building the skills around it and to create outcomes. Now, am I going to, be a surgeon or do something that requires a high level of expertise? Absolutely not. But business is not rocket science. I don't think you need to, know one thing for 10 years to be able to do it, right? I'm not doing like cybersecurity or, very knowledge and expertise driven things. I'm doing more holistic things. So that's kind of how I see it. It's a capability. It's the ability to jump in and do new things very quickly. And that's how I've started a podcast. That's kind of how I got into technology. It's kind of how I got into product management. It's kind of how I got into strategic initiatives and corporate development and partnerships. And everything I've done, it's been from that capability.
Yeah, and I think you've touched on like some great themes there. And I think the first theme I would kind of point our audience to is the idea of canceling out the things that you know that you don't like, or even just the things that you shouldn't do to get to where you are. And that's Charlie Munger commonly refers to as the invert, like the psychology of just constantly inverting, like asking yourself, if you wanted to fail at this, what should you do? And so write that down and you go, okay, then I should just ignore all of that. And that can also prevent you from making all the basic fundamental mistakes. And yeah, I think when the idea of, you know, realizing that, yeah, like I'm specializing in something that's just not traditionally defined. And essentially, I think most people who constantly focus on growing will end up learning about a lot of different industries, a lot of different facets, and a lot of different subjects, because there's only so much, I think, that you can go deep into without getting really tunneled and narrowed into it. Like, if you want to learn something, or like, you know, learn a subject and get 80% of what the subject really stands for, you don't really need to dedicate like 20, 30 years of your life. So you eventually get bored of it, you'll find another subject, and you'll slowly become very multidisciplinary and become, you know, quote unquote, like, have like worldly wisdom. And that can become somewhat of like a specialty, because you can actually see these like interconnectedness, and you can actually come and look at problems from a very completely different perspective and relate different mental models to it. And I think you started, like, I think implementing that in your new role into Thoughtwire. But before we get there, I want to learn more about what was that inflection point like, where you decided, okay, I think I've seen enough in consulting, and you decided to transition into the world of like a tech company. At what point did that occur to you? Like, how did that decision-making process go?
Yeah. So, I mean, you know, to be very transparent and vulnerable here, and something I've never really shared before, is if I have to be completely honest, I think I jumped too early. I think I made a suboptimal decision at the time. And there was some form of, you know, maybe regret's too strong of a word, but I don't think I, you know, quote unquote, saw enough of consulting before I left. I think I just wanted to try something else, and it was also at that point in my life where there were a lot of changes going on, but you know, primarily on the personal front. So I decided to, you know, really take a revamp and a reinvention period. And so happens that was also when I left consulting and jumped into Thoughtwire. But you know, I just want to be very clear with everyone that I think, you know, looking back, I was just getting my momentum in consulting. I was just getting, quote unquote, good or at it, right? I was just learning how to figure it out, how to manage a team, how to lead a strategy project, how to create a plan, how to execute on it, how to lead, you know, 3 or 4 people on my team. I was just figuring that out, and I jumped. And in hindsight, I should have played that out for another like year or so to really stretch out and flex that muscle. I had just learned a new skill and I jumped off it, and I should have practiced it a little more. And again, these are some of the weaknesses that I've been working on in my own life, both personally and professionally. So that was kind of it. I jumped. I want to try new things. But I think what's really important, again, you know, back to this notion of strategy from a career perspective, you're going to make the wrong choices along the way, right? But again, I knew that my capability to iterate, and again, that's something that I really built a lot of depth in. It's like I have a direction, right? And I don't think, you know, whether I stayed in consulting or jumped in Thoughtwire, that direction would still held true. That why, that North Star still held true. You make decisions along the way, and you iterate, and you improve along the way. And then you maximize and you optimize the opportunities in front of you to get there. So when I jumped, I was doing a lot of software stuff. I was learning about agile methodology. I learned a lot of great skills that, especially on the agile front, that continue to hone and refine my point of view of the world and life and career business. But I think I could have done better if I stretched out the consulting piece. But I was like, you know what? I'm here, right? And this is the path I picked. How can I, like, you know, what is the next step that I can do to course correct? And I think too often we get stuck in this analysis paralysis world, especially in the career front. Like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And we think that the next decision is the end all decision, that this decision is gonna, you know, forever define who we are. And that's just not true. I think, especially in today's world, you can course correct. You can iterate. I don't think most career decisions are truly crippling in that if it will forever force you down a path that you can't, you know, turn back from or change. And that's kind of what I did. I jumped in this world. I learned about software, built tech, you know, managed projects, delivered on projects. I did that for a bit, and I was like, you know what? I don't think this is who I am. And I always kind of knew I wanted to learn the skill to bring it back to the business front. And that's kind of where this whole chief of staff and strategic initiatives thing started to unroll. And now I'm kind of doing the best of both worlds. I'm taking all the things I learned in software and agile delivery. I'm taking all the things I did in consulting, and I've effectively created a new role and I mashed them all together. Right? So I've course corrected, and this has been a 3-4 year process.
And I think a big thing I want to highlight is that mindset of decision making. I think the decision making framework that is commonly thought about is, how do I optimize to make the right decision, when I think it's more about how do I optimize to get the best options on the table. Because when you have two options and one is so obviously better, like if option A is so much better than option B, then there's nothing to have a dilemma about. But your process comes from A and B being very similar. And I think what you have to control for is, are A and B both good options though? Are they both good options that I've come upon? And then if that's the case, and you don't know, you have to pick A or you have to pick B, and then you have to course correct and iterate. And I think a great analogy was just, if you got into Harvard and Stanford and Warren, they're all great options. It doesn't matter which one you pick, because you're not even going to know what if and the what ifs of the other options. You pick one and then you iterate afterwards, and you just make you make changes, you learn, and you go forward. But if the options were, it's either going to university or not going to university, then you have to decide there. That's different. And I think that kind of framework is not really applied as often. People tend to focus too much on making the right decision, when the reality is you just can't know. If you knew, then you should just be a fortune teller, right?
For sure, there's a couple of things you said there, right? I think, when there is a very obvious answer, then that's an obvious answer. You decide. When you're faced with a dilemma, and you know that it's 2 or 3 options that you really, really want to do. Well, guess what? If you want to do, and you really, really want to do all, 2 or 3 options, whichever one you pick, it's something you really, really want to do. You know what I mean? Like, I think someone who brought up, said to me in the past, like, if you're faced with a dilemma, it's a good thing, because that means all options are good. Like, you can't fail. It's a fail safe, right? So that's one piece. The second piece is like, look, I think people should be intentional about their decision making. I think they should create a framework on what success looks like, figure out what the guiding principles are, the criteria, how to weigh it, be very methodical about that framework, and then decide, right? Absolutely. But I think we've placed too much emphasis on making the right decision, while that is very important, and not enough on the other side of the coin, which is building the system and the capacity to iterate and to move and make progress afterwards, right? We forgot about the afterwards, which is the most important part, whichever path you take, whether you go to university or not, whether you pick this firm or that. The value comes from how you realize it and extract afterwards, after the decision. And we've completely forgot about that. So that's why often you see people make decisions in with regards to education or career, and they've thought it through. This is the most optimized decision. I'm gonna go and become a CA or a CFA or whatever it is. I'm not gonna knock on any particular designation. They make the decision based on that, because a CA is the most important thing. But they didn't think about how much value can they extract. How can they extract value in the 3 years afterwards? They haven't thought that through. And most of my friends, and there's a very limited sample size, I would say, in that post-decision period, that they really regretted that decision because they didn't think through the implementation of it. How exactly was it going to look? And that's something we often encounter. I think something that we need to place more emphasis on. I think that's where education, as a concept, as a system, has not done a good job at. We've been trained to, hand in an essay, to write answers on a test, and we have one shot, and you have one chance to get the grade, and that's it. That's not how life works. That's not how business works. That's not how career works. You don't have one shot. I mean, most often than not, there's big opportunities, but opportunities keep coming, and we can't be limited in making that one decision thinking that is the end all be all. Because I think we over our careers will make the wrong decisions, and B, we don't think enough about how to get the value out of it afterwards, which is the most important part.
Yeah, and so we talked about how, or you alluded to how, when you moved to Thoughtwire, you felt that you might have been to jump a little too early. But at that point, when you were in the position of choosing to make the jump or not, what were your options then at that point? What kind of system did you have in place to actually look at the decision-making framework that you had then?
When I jumped and joined Thoughtwire,
Yeah.
I think at the time it was to stay at PwC. There was another opportunity, which was a client of mine that I was going to go work for in a similar capacity. I was going to work with the CEO on just business-related stuff, on how to grow the company and whatnot. Or I jump into Thoughtwire, a growing company, get involved in how to build tech and deliver tech, but also get involved in other things. And my framework was really, okay, thinking about my end goal of wanting to build and start my own thing, right?
So that's always been on the mind.
Yeah, that's always been in the back of my mind. I knew that I was going to be in the areas of, well, not in the areas, but be somehow involved in technology. And now, I mean, in hindsight, when I look back, almost everything's involved in technology, so that's not a strong criteria. But again, I think it's kind of like, in hindsight, I would have done it differently. But at the time, you just need to pick a framework. You just need to put it down on paper and execute and not get caught up in this, because I could think about this for days, weeks, and months, right? So it was really, okay, so what is that end goal? And I had that in mind. It was like, okay, so now it's like, what skills, what capabilities do I want to learn right now in my life that helps me get me there? And the obvious answer was I needed to learn about technology. I needed to learn about product. I needed to learn how to manage the process of building a product, how to build technology, how to deploy it, how to get people to use it to create outcomes. That was the biggest criteria, and that's what led me down Thoughtwire, because the other startup I was going to join was more focused on the business side of things, on the commercial side, and I didn't value enough at the time on, can I get more out of consulting and further refine and run with the new plateau and level that I just achieved? Can I run that further? I didn't value that at the time. It was just, I kept it simple. It was the why, and then what specific skills and capabilities and experiences, and Thoughtwire ticked all the boxes for that one. So that was the obvious decision for me.
And then you went to Thoughtwire as a delivery consultant, but you've been very entrepreneurial. You've been very intentional in actually crafting the role that you wanted, this dream role of yourself, which is currently the Director of Strategic Initiatives. So you went from delivery consultant to Chief of Staff to Director of Strategic Initiatives. And how did that come about, actually? Because people, I think, the common belief is that, if you want to try a lot of different things and see a lot about just how a company in general runs, like the marketing, sales, or what have you, go into a startup, you'll get to touch a lot of different things. But at the same time, usually when startups hire, they want someone for a very specific role because they have a very specific need, because they need to survive the next day and the next day and the day after that. And only after you've done that, then you can have the wherewithal to say, okay, now what I want to try, how do I evolve? But I don't think it just kind of happens. So what was your journey like in actually crafting that role for yourself?
You're absolutely right. It doesn't just happen, right? I mean, companies that are trying to grow and scale will hire for a specific skill. That's what you described. And it's funny, as I look back now at the time, I didn't even have the skills to be a delivery consultant. No, in hindsight, I have never worked in Agile before. I had no idea what software delivery lifecycle is. I had no idea what servers are or like user interface. I knew nothing. I think the extent of what I learned was right before I took the job. I did like a software boot camp, and I did some code academy. So I figured out what a class was and what a variable was. That was the extent of my knowledge of technology. I didn't know what a firewall was, right? Other than that thing you see on your computer every once in a while, right? So I'm not even going to sugarcoat it. I didn't know much, but my value prop, again, and something that I've always been very good at, and that in consulting helped me refine, is storytelling. And knowing my narrative, and my pitch was, I may not know all these things, but I have the capability and the capacity to pick up new skills and learn and create outcomes very quickly. And that is my promise to you. That is the promise of myself. The Raphael Wong promise is that I will learn and pick things up quickly and get you results very quickly. So that's kind of how I started on the delivery consultant path. Probably did that for about 18 months. Again, to meet the needs of the company. And then over time, I always did different things. And at the company, the CFO was also like a friend and mentor of mine. And he knew I came from consulting. He knew I wanted to do different things. He knew the end game I kind of wanted to get to. So he gave me extra, quote unquote, homework. And I was always someone who raised my hand and did more, right? And this is something that I think everyone should practice more. I think this is something that's undervalued. It's raise your hand and do more things. When I was in school, I did extracurriculars. When I was at PwC, I did other things beyond just my job. I did thought leadership. I created a global retail report. I helped with recruiting. I helped with practice development. I helped create frameworks and methodologies and stuff. I've always wanted to do more and take initiative, and I think that's what helped. So at the time, our CEO, Mike Monteith, he's really involved and active in the Canadian ecosystem, Canadian innovation ecosystem. And at the time, the government had just released these supercluster bids. So I worked with Mike to create the strategy for a healthcare supercluster, and we amassed a massive opportunity, a lot of different stakeholders, a business model, strategy, and everything. And I did that with them as part of, on top of my delivery consulting role. So now I have like a 1.5 kind of full-time role here. I did that for a bit, and then through that, we worked really well together. He saw the value that I brought from my strategy consulting days on top of understanding how technology works, stack that up to help him do a lot of these market development, economic development, commercial growth stuff. So after doing that, they offered me a role to work exclusively with Mike on helping him grow and scale the company. At the time, we were preparing for a Series A. We were preparing for a lot of things on really taking the company to the next level, from this platform-led go-to-market to an application-led. We are a product company. That's a fundamental business transformation with a lot of things going on. So that's what I've been helping him with since. In that first year, I was effective. I led growth initiatives and chief of staff, which was just a generic role that I gave myself, which was basically I just did whatever Mike needed me to help him do. Everything from helping give demos to the VCs, to corporate development, to partnerships, to business development, to some sales and marketing before we had sales and marketing teams, some PR stuff before we had a PR team, to doing some HR stuff and organizational design stuff. See, as you can see, it's like I did everything, and this is something I genuinely love. I got my hands in everything. And then did that for a bit, and then we want to focus focus a little more. I was kind of like, what, there's certain things I didn't want to do anymore, and I became aware of that, and there are certain things I wanted to double down on, which is really, we live, Mike and I work in a unique area of the company where I'm really fortunate that we work in the future. I'm less involved nowadays into the day-to-day operations, although I still play a heavy role in helping us build up our partnership and business development capabilities. So that's the extent of my hand in the current operations. But my other hand is really dipped into, what is the future of the company? Where is Thoughtwire going? What is our messaging? What is our narrative? What are other areas that we can unlock to create new opportunities, to open our market, our addressable market for ourselves as a company, and create a bigger pie so that everyone wins, including Thoughtwire. And that's the unique world I live in right now, which is, extremely fulfilling. And all of this ties into learning how Mike thinks about growing and scaling a company in a responsible and sustainable manner, all of which will give me the skills and the experience to do it myself one day.
Got it. And can you share one example of a kind of future looking strategic project that you would be working on, actually doing, or is that too confidential?
I would so without giving too much details, Thoughtwire is involved in the built environment, and a unique point of view that we have is that there's a lot of conversations right now in the world around smart cities and what does that look like, and our unique point of view is that North Americans spend 87% of their time indoors, right? Yet most smart city initiatives are, traffic related or parking related, or, putting phone chargers in parking benches, and, putting lights in, public spaces. And all of that's important from a safety and sustainability and whatnot perspective. But what about what happens inside these buildings? What happens inside these built environments? And how do we interface the inside and outside worlds together? So that's really something we're thinking about, is how can our point of view into built environments, right now in hospitals, long-term care homes, and commercial buildings, how does that point of view, plug in into the larger smart city fabric? That's something I'm constantly thinking about right now.
Got it. And while you're doing this, while you're building out, you gain the trust of the CEO, you put your hand up, create this position for yourself, create this opportunity for yourself. You also, have been slowly dabbling into now branching out in your own entrepreneurial route. So when Luki connected us, he also mentioned that, Raph also has a podcast called the Canvas Series, and so you guys would jab over that. And so, you've been in the podcast game longer than I have. I think you started back in 2017, and how did that come about? Tell the audience about what Canvas Series started out as and why, and how has it kind of grown to what it is right now?
Yeah, so starting out at the time, I had it was just at the top of 2017. Yeah, gosh, time flies. And I had just did an exercise where I reached out to some colleagues, friends, and mentors and family with a couple questions. I don't remember exactly what they are, but I can share it with folks afterwards if they're interested. I just asked people for feedback. Like from a career perspective, we ask we have 360-degree feedbacks. We have mentors and coaches and whatnot. In a work context, we always ask for feedback. We get customer feedback, but how often do you get feedback on your life? How often do you get feedback on who you are as Daniel Lee? And I don't think people do that enough. And as a result, we're not self-aware of who we are, how we behave, what excites us, what are the things that get us going. So that's precisely what I did. And some of the key insights, being the analytical person I did, I dug into the information. I pulled out the key themes and takeaways. And it was really, people enjoyed having these conversations with me around strategy, around both personal and professional development, around how to create systems. At the time, we didn't call it systems, but how do you create a capability to do things and make decisions and whatnot. So that's really what started the Canvas Series podcast. It was, if people enjoy having these conversations with me, why don't I share this with the world? It's very low cost to distribute it, right? I mean, like, you put it on some podcast on distribution platform, you get some mics. It's low cost to add value for others, for doing something I already genuinely enjoy doing. I think that's a key word. It's like, if you're going to pick up other projects and priorities in your life or even your career, it's like, you should genuinely enjoy it. Are there parts of it I don't enjoy? Of course. I think that'd be foolish to say that I'm constantly smiling and happy in 24 hours of my day. I think that's a misnomer that people try to sell folks, which I think is false. Like, I personally hate editing the podcast. Gosh, do I hate that. Like, it's so monotonous and it drives me insane working with these little so I started there. It was something I genuinely enjoyed. I accepted the things I didn't enjoy, and I pushed along. Again, back to the whole idea of, I made a decision. I'm going to execute it. I'm going to develop a new skill in a new area I didn't know much about. I raised my hand to myself. I took initiative, and I did something I enjoyed. So that's where the Canvas Series started. And I called it the Canvas Series because there's this idea that, I use a canvas as a metaphor for life, in that too often in the personal development or business book world, people prescribe these rules, these, like, you got to do these 5 or 10 things to be successful, and I think that's false. And I think that when it comes to how you design your life, both personally or professionally or whatever it is, it's up to you. So it was my job through the Canvas Series to give you the paintbrushes and the colors, which is really to give you the tools and insights for you to design your own life. I am never going to tell someone, like, you got to do A, B, or C. And even in this conversation, I keep saying, like, if that's, if you want to climb the corporate ladder, that's something you should think about. If you want to do this, it's something you should think about. Everyone's got their own way of doing things. What I want to do is give people the insights and tools to make their decision and to execute on it and to extract value from it. That's always been the founding principle of the Canvas Series. So started that in 2017, and that's evolved to where it is right now, where the Canvas Series is still a podcast. It's part of a larger umbrella of what I call myTechne, which is a company that that provides media and technology to help busy people create results. And our unique point of view is this use of systems and how to be systematic about doing that, on how do you act intentionally, how do you stay organized, how do you create results in the areas of your life that matter. And so that's really what the Canvas here is now, and that's how it's going to unfold into a much larger play.
And this much larger play, the myTechne, how was that determined? How did that come about? What steps were involved in deciding, okay, we're going to make this bigger umbrella now, and we're going to make this product that's going to help people?
Yeah, I think all along I knew that this was going to be a bigger thing. I think the founding catalyst was around sharing conversations I already enjoyed. I did that for a bit, and I was kind of like, oh, like there's something that we can do here that was unique, that was different from what other I would say quote unquote thought leaders in the space were doing, whether it's podcasting or books or videos or whatnot, or even just tooling. Everyone's so focused on this rigid, like, here are 1, 2, 3 things for your solution. And I think that makes sense. Don't get me wrong. I think having very specific prescribed solutions makes sense, because as consumers, we want to buy certainty. We want to buy, if I got A, B, and C, it's going to help me get D. So my point of view is really, okay, that's what people want. How can I give people tools to get the D, like to get that final outcome, that predictable outcome, without prescribing them A, B, and C? So I'd say in the first year I just did the first 18 months I just did podcasts. That's kind of what I did, with the idea that this was going to get into something bigger, but I didn't know what that was. And I think that's okay. I think too often we try to have it all figured out. We try to have the revenue model figured out and the business model figured out and the distribution channels and everything. And I think it's good to think through those things. But in the beginning, in the first 18 months, it was really around, how can I add value? What do people genuinely like and don't like about the show? How are we different? How are we doing something that others are not doing? And that's literally all I focused on in the first 18 months. Constantly getting feedback from people on social media, in person, at different events and whatnot. And some of the things I learned was that people liked how relatable the show was. People liked that we talked about what things people specifically did, but we also unpacked their thought process, and we gave people, like, you don't have to do it like how Raph does it. You don't have to do it like how Hamza does it. You don't have to do it how Sam or Mary does it, right? This is their thought process. How can you do it? How can you manage burnout in a way that works for you? How can you apply small, consistent actions in a way that works for you? How can you storytell in a way that works for you? And then over time, I started to realize that's it. That's it. This principle that these principles of success are universal. You have to set goals. You have to focus. There's certain set of things. You have to be intentional. You should be self-aware. You should add value. You should be empathetic. You can watch a couple videos or read a couple books, and you can kind of figure out what those success principles are, right? So I often say that these principles of success are universal, but how they're applied is personal. And that's really where the shift came in, which is really around last summer when I thought about, how do I translate these universal success principles, use media and technology to help people make it work for themselves, to help people make it personal. And that's where this whole myTechne story has been evolving over the last, I'd say, 9 months. And the word techne, I came across it randomly on a podcast, which is an ancient Greek word about the skill or art of making or doing. It's practical knowledge. It's for the everyday person. I think at the time in Greece, there was theoretical knowledge, so the people who debated and talked about philosophy and higher order kind of thinking. And then there was the everyday person, the craftsman, the people in medicine, the people in art or food and agriculture, whatever it is. And they had this practical knowledge that worked for them. It was context dependent. It was about creating outcome and value. And I'm like, that's literally my point of view. It captured it all perfectly. I want to give people tools that they can apply in their own context and their own situation to create something meaningful, a unit of outcome that is valuable for them. And that's where myTechne came from. And that's where everything we're all focused on. Like the Canvas series now is really focused on busy people and how they're creating systems in their life, in their unique situation, to create the outcomes that matter for them. And what are these systems? And like, how do we enable people to do that is the problem we're tackling now.
Got it. And so myTechne right now, is it, have you started actually monetizing, like generating revenue and products out, or is it still kind of more in the incubation, like constantly testing and trying to refine the product?
Yeah, we're still in the incubation stage. Right now for, my goals is to really stabilize the content engine piece, right? Because we're creating content both in terms of like social media content, the monthly podcast. We've also launched a weekly podcast, which digs into the theories behind these systems. We're going to launch a blog series soon. And the content engine isn't just for content. It's, of course, it's there to, to educate people, to add value, to create a brand for ourselves. But I would say the actual fundamental reason why I'm doing all that is to gather requirements and feedback. When I interview my guests, and I hope to have you on the show one day as well, is I want to understand how do you create your systems as a guest, and I want to start identifying those configuration points. And then when I launch the podcast, I get feedback from people in person, through social media. Oh, what's working for you? How do you design your system? How is yours different from Daniel? So on and so forth. All of this is amassing into a giant R&D exercise, a giant list of requirements and design principles that I'm going to start prioritizing and sorting through. And that's going to make the version 1.0 of the product, which we plan on launching later this year. We plan on getting a beta for an MVP on the later half of 2019. And I want to start, turning these insights into a real product to help people do that.
Got it. Yeah. And honestly, like I'd love to come on, the Canvas series in the future and talk to you for like an hour about systems. That definitely is going to be it's going to be a fun time. And for someone who's, so focused on being self-aware like yourself, what have you identified as being the kind of flow state activity for you? Like the activities that you're just going to be just, engaged in, you just forget to eat, sleep, just go to the bathroom, like that thing's your thing.
I would say most things relating to the Canvas series and now myTechne.
Yeah, it's just your baby.
Yeah, it's just my baby. It's what I love. And just back to that point earlier, there are things I don't like, obviously, right? I think, there are things I don't want to deal with. Like I don't want to file tax returns. I don't want to build an accounting system. I don't want to edit the content. Like there are certain things I genuinely don't want to do. But I think holistically, knowing why I do what I do, knowing how this fits into the bigger play, knowing how this is a reflection of me, right? Like when I first started the Canvas series, now myTechne, all of this, I would say, is the purest reflection of who I am and my point of view on how people can create value both personally and professionally. I genuinely do believe that these principles of success are universal, but how it applies personal. It's literally how I've approached life, and just, going back to the beginning of this conversation around the need to specialize or breadth or whatever it is. Those concepts are universal, but how I applied it is how my story unfolded, and I stuck to my gut. I stuck to what works for me. I stuck to my context. I took advice from my mentors. Don't get me wrong. I heard them loud and clear to specialize. I'm just specializing in something that's non-traditional, non-conventional. I'm specializing in what I believe is right. So I think that mix of taking advice but making it work for you is truly what I believe in, and that's what drives me through these things. And that's what also, like when I get in the flow and like I'm editing the podcast, for example, before I hired Alex, I would get just like absolutely like enamored in it. When I'm doing research, when I'm editing the podcast, when I'm creating content, when I'm thinking through insights and whatnot, I just get so into it. And I also do other things that help me get into a state of flow, right? I used to, in the winter, not so much right now, but I'll go for a run. Like I'll go for a light jog, I'll get my juices going, get fired up, I come back and I bang out 3 hours of work at night. And like I think through different things about, what are the triggers of flow and how do I use that at the right times to get me into a flow state. And, Stephen Kotler, talks a lot about this in the Flow Genome Project about what are those 20 triggers. Again, everyone's got triggers that work for them. You need to find what works for you. And it's a really iterative and experimentational process. And that is what I've built a capability around, and I've gone deep on. I'm very self-aware, and I'm very intentional and systematic and diligent about the experiments I create in my life to learn new things and to adapt new skills and to create outcomes. And that's something that I've completely obsessed with over the last 3 or 4 years, and how to apply psychology and neuroscience and business and design thinking principles all into this.
Love it. Yeah, I love all of that. Huge fan of Stephen Kotler's work as well. And yeah, I think it's something that, I hope that as listeners listen to this, they start kind of, I say it constantly, but, repetition is the way to get into your mind. And so I hope maybe this is the one that triggers some other people to focus on their own journey of self-awareness. And so as we kind of wrap up to the ending legs of the podcast, I wanted to ask you, with that kind of North Star and the why that you've constantly alluded to in the back of your mind, or maybe that's not, now it's like fully all over your mind, where do you see yourself, or what activities do you see yourself doing like 10 years out? What kind of vision do you have, and how does it all look?
Yeah, so I think, before I outline what that vision looks like, it's probably worth a disclaimer that it's one thing to have a direction. It's one thing to constantly have the right system in place, to constantly reflect and check in, like, is this the right direction? Is this the right vision? Am I doing the right thing? So I think part vision, part systems, and like having the systems in play and the follow through for the next 10 years is just as important as defining what that vision is. So I think I encourage everyone to think about it as well, and not just get caught up on visualizing what that looks like, but really think about what are the systems that will help you get you there over the next 10 years in a sustainable fashion. But to back to your question about, what are the key activities do I see myself doing? I see myself managing this thing full time. I see myself, managing the content front. Like, I imagine a team around me. Right now I have 2 people on the team. I imagine this is going to grow to about 15, 20, whatever amount of people I need. We're going to continue to create content in this space. We're going to continue to create technology, the key product in this space, and continue to establish ourselves as the thought leader. And effectively what I want to do is create this and define the standard of what is a productivity and life system, and how can these systems, these combination of process, tool, and people, environment, help people organize their life, how people navigate all the different priorities in their life, which is really where the world's going, right? This work-life balance mentality is disappearing. So how do you manage all these different priorities? And I see my day-to-day really being an operator, really setting the direction of where the team's going and operating it, holding people accountable. I see, my leadership style is generally pretty flat hierarchy, in the sense, like, I like getting into the weeds and rolling up my sleeves and getting things done. Again, not necessarily things I want to do, but knowing that if I roll up my sleeves and get the things done, it moves us closer towards that vision. I'm all in. So if it means I have to, do some customer support, if it means I gotta create content, it doesn't matter what level it is. It doesn't matter if this is my company or not. I will do what it takes to move us forward, and whatever activity that entails at the time, I will do it. I think.
Got it. And if the 20-year-old Raph, you were to see that Raph right now, what advice would you like to have had at that 20-year-old stage? You were probably like 3rd year in UT, you decided you're going to leave audit and not do it. What advice do you kind of wish that you had gotten at that stage?
So if I had to, there's so many, but if I had to pick one advice, it would be the sooner I can be practice self-awareness and be intentional about that, the better it is. I think I always had some sense of self-awareness and intention, but it was always unconscious. So not necessarily intention, but like, I was always unconscious about, I knew I didn't want to do this. I kind of knew what I want to do and stuff. But I think the more I can practice that sooner, the more I develop, I think, the confidence to act on that. I think the easier things would have been, I think I would have enjoyed it more, right? Like, while I got certain feedback to not leave audit, while I got certain feedback to specialize, and I still followed my gut, it wasn't easy. And I think that's something that's often not talked about. It's like, oh, it sounds like I did all these courageous things, and I went against the masses, and I said no, like, F you audits, not for me. That wasn't easy at all. That was not easy, and I think having more confidence in that decision would have made life and that journey more enjoyable, because it was not easy. And I think that's something that people need to come to terms with. And I think having more self-awareness and developing confidence and courage around that would have definitely helped at the time.
Yeah, I think that's a great one. It is not easy, and I can empathize with you because I've gone through it. But I think if you haven't gone through it, it's hard to empathize, because you just don't have that kind of perspective. But I think that kind of confidence is extremely valuable to have whenever you make that kind of decision. And so the last question is, you and I, we both read a lot. We love reading. What book do you gift the most? And I know for different people, you might gift different books, but just from your mental memory, which book have you ended up giving the most?
I think one book that I always recommend people to read is Sapiens. I don't know exactly why it doesn't necessarily benefit from a business or personal development perspective, but knowing, I think the history, and this is a very high level, obviously, version of humanity's history, right? Like, you can go into this for decades if you really want to, but knowing the history of our species, knowing how we got here, knowing what helped us survive and become what we are today, I think helps us appreciate what being human is, appreciate what appreciate how we become what we are, and then how can we leverage that into the future. We started off as a very average, normal species on this planet. How did we become at the top of the food chain? How have we built all these things? How have we gone to space? How have we built all these high-rise towers? It's something that it should provoke a question of why and how, and then understanding that and knowing that, how can you tap into that? And just a quick insert from the book, The Imagined Order. Like, what is that, and how do you leverage imagination in your life to create outcomes so significant as what our species have done? I think that's something that everyone should really think about.
Nice. Yeah, great suggestion. And where can our listeners learn more about what you are doing? Where can they go?
So I think on LinkedIn, they can find me at Raphael Wong. And I would say on social media, they can find me at myTechne.io. And that's also our website, www.mytechne.io. They can learn about the podcast, the content, the technology we're building, the mission of the company. I invite everyone to participate in this conversation. I think in our generation in particular, how we're growing up in a society where there's so many priorities and noise and things going on. How can we collectively work together to share knowledge and insight, so everyone does things that work for them, and we create outcome together? And I think that's going to make the world a better place.
Excellent. Yeah, and I love that message as well. And thanks so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your story with myself and my listeners, Raph.
Appreciate Thank you for having me.
Yeah, have a good one. So thanks for listening to the podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, please check out other episodes, and don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date for the future episodes. Also, I would really appreciate it if you would leave a review on iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher, whichever is applicable to you. To see past episodes, you can go to oldmandan.com/podcasts. Also, you can sign up to my weekly newsletter on my blog, oldmandan.com/newsletter. You can stay up to date with future podcast episodes that way, and included in the newsletter are my book reviews I write, my weekly article related to the domain of self-development systems, as well as 7 things I learned throughout the week on being healthy, wealthy, and wise. Finally, special thanks to icons8.com for allowing me to use their music, Tiny People, on the podcast. Great. I will see you all next time. Take care.